Hello, my name is Andrew Gary and welcome to Seismic Soundoff, in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. This episode I am joined by Bill Barkhouse, SEG's Associate Executive Director of Business Development and Geophysics. Bill will share about the founding and future of the SEG Advanced Modeling, or SEAM. Seismic Soundoff wants to hear from you. Please email us at podcast@seg.org or call us at country code 1-918-497-4627 with your comments and ideas for future shows. SEAM is a partnership between industry and SEG designed to advance geophysical science and technology through the construction of subsurface models and generation of synthetic data sets. SEAM Phase 1 started close to 10 years ago with building data sets for marine deep water systems in collaboration with 36 companies. It is currently building a team to move forward on the multidisciplinary integration life of field, which Bill will explain later. On September 15th and 16th, SEAM, in partnership with the Geophysical Society of Houston, will host a workshop using data from this project. More details and tickets at seg.org/podcast. Bill based some of our conversation off a recent presentation. You can follow along with him at seg.org/podcast and turn to slide 4. It is not essential to have this slide in front of you, but it will help. I join Bill next.
Are the general SEG members in the geophysical community familiar with SEAM? I know a lot of, early on in the SEAM literature, you would talk about how you would compare it to the SEG EAGE SALT model, but at this point is SEAM and what it represents fairly well known to where you just kind of jump into what?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I think that SEAM as a brand name is known. What I think that the SEAM volunteers have been less than effective is explaining what that means.
So you have companies engaged in the SEAM project that help fund it, that get open access to the data before anyone else, that get to help influence what you're even going to be doing, in future phases. How does something like that, the workshop in September that I believe is based on SEAM data, how does that kind of outreach to the geophysical community?
That's a very important one because, if you will, we have data, the results, if you will, that are kind of 1 of 3 states of accessibility. Those in which we receive government funding have to be totally accessible as soon as possible. That's one of the requirements of government funding. That's a good news story from an organization such as SEG who shares the same value. We want people to be able to access the knowledge and the information. When companies come into it sometimes, when they focus on the questions area, that's why the consortium models work so effectively, is that it's the people who pay, if you will, for the privilege of determining what problem they're going to focus on. And it's that sharing of the resources, because each of the companies will have technical representatives, they'll have a management company representative, and they're going to determine at that point in time what the questions of the day are that they're going to work towards. And so, but one of the things that they've asked for, which is very classical industry, is they've asked for a 2-year period generally, is that when that information comes available, it'll only be available to those people that paid the original subscription, if you will, membership, if you will. And so there's a period of time that. What's so exciting about this will be the second historical SEAM workshop. The first one was in 2013, was highly successful. So we had to wait that period of time until that 2-year period was finished.
Now I want to ask you to explain slide 4 in the SEAM presentation, which is available at seg.org/podcast. Bill, please provide us the history and future of SEAM.
The way to visualize this is to think of a timeline. And it starts at the left-hand side, which we will anchor in the time frame 2007, if you will. And then you would move horizontally, to the far right-hand side that we're going to bound at 2015, which was the start of another project, but actually present day 2016. So on the top half of the slide, which eventually I hope many of you will see visually, we're looking at various systems, okay? So think geology. And geophysics is a term that's a combination of geology and physics. And so, but I'm speaking explicitly now to geology. And there'll be 4 columns, if you will. The first column would be marine deep water systems as a type of geology. And then sequentially then, in this timeline, starting in the time frame of 2010, or approximately 3 to 4 years later than the first major project, land systems. The third column would be special problems, and specifically we're speaking to pore pressure. And what we're particularly excited about that we've been attempting to launch here since 2014, but it's where this has evolved to in this grand challenge of a multidisciplinary integration, what SEG calls the life of field. Well, within these geologic systems, if you will, the specific type of geology we're doing in the marine deep water systems, that first column that I spoke to, are what are called subsalt plays. So this is in the marine environment. There are very specific places in the world, the offshore Gulf of Mexico in the United States, offshore Brazil would be two rapid examples of where salt as a geologic phenomenon plays a very prominent role in terms of how the traps are made, how the reservoirs are sealed, all these various geologic methods that ensure a successful hydrocarbon process. In the land systems, we have studied and produced results associated with 3 Earth models. One's referred to as the unconventional, which was named after Ray Barrett, who had worked on this as a professional from British Petroleum. And within months of the completion of that multi-year project, I think it was up to 5-6 years, he passed away suddenly. And so his colleagues wanted to dedicate the name of this, which is naming in scientific fields is quite an honor. So the second system is the arid near surface. And so for those of us familiar with world geography, this will be characteristic of what we refer to as a carbonate environment or a karst environment. Now, here in Oklahoma and Texas, we're familiar with these when we go spelunking into the underground caverns and things like this. In the Middle East, this would be the big carbonate fields of the Middle East that would be an example. And then there's the foothills model, Earth model. So this would be the third land system model. I mentioned Barrett unconventional, then I mentioned the arid near surface, and now the foothills model. The foothills model would be similar to like what we see in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, or if you went further on out into California, you see the aspect of rocks kind of moving up over rocks and turning over in these very high environments. The third column would be special problems, and this was specifically to a very important topic. It's called pore pressure and the prediction of pore pressure. And this was, we were encouraged in this by a partnership that we have with an organization that's very well known. It's been around for several decades, known as the Research Program for a Secure America. And they tend to be a clearinghouse for U.S. Department of Energy funds for these types of programs and initiatives. And then the fourth column is this very new project that we did launch in December of 2015, the Multidisciplinary Life of Field, which focuses on reservoir characterization and dynamic fluid flow. So I've kind of outlined then the geology. 4 of these over this time frame of a decade. 3 of these projects are coming to a conclusion of pore pressure this fall in September, and the launching of the new one of the Multidisciplinary Integration Life of Field.
One common trait in the first 2 columns on the slide, marine deep water systems and land systems, is seismic imaging technology. Could you share the importance of this technology?
Being geophysicists, one of our toolkits, which involves many techniques, many tools, a specific one that we're very well known for over our 88-year history is seismic imaging technology. And it's easy to see from the volume of work and peer-reviewed archival papers and things like this that this has been a premier tool that's very much favored in our journals. In the land systems, it was a combination now, and here's the building block effect of the seismic imaging technology, but also the notion of unconventional resources, which is a relatively new phenomena, if you will, more or less in this kind of 7 to 10 year time frame. And it involves geology now much more in terms of the geologic processes and how they're formed and things like this. And the third one, under the special problems that I was just referring to, we've gone one step further. And that when you look at the tools and techniques that are presently used in common practice by industry, some of those techniques go back to the 50s, and they haven't evolved very much from that. And so what the expectation was of all the parties that came to the group here is could we kind of set like a foundation in terms of where this state of the art of the technology is presently, and can we make any, can we point in any direction that's some considerations of techniques or tools, of which there are many to choose from, but have the most potential for reducing that uncertainty, therefore making this more safe, if you will. And in that case, because of the advances that have occurred in the prior decade, the use of a geologic tool, which is referred to as integrated basin modeling, plus rock physics was used, plus geomechanics was used. And so you can see this building block nature in terms of these extra disciplines coming together and being integrated. In a first order sense, using the same basic physics principles, we can make images of the subsurface. And what we're trying to do is to identify the presence or absence of a fluid. In this case, it could be water, it could be gas, or it could be oil. And then we want to look where it moves. And that's what this is about. So that's when we have the integrated geology, plus the geophysics, plus the rock physics, plus the geomechanics, plus the reservoir engineering simulation. And so it allows us to cover this full range, and it changes from the prior three models that are kind of static, just like a photo. You take a picture and you capture that in time, to where now we can do this dynamically. We can see it just like in a video or a movie, how these things are changing in that regard. And so that's the essence of the SEAM, work and efforts over this. The prestige associated with this is we are recognized on a global, worldwide basis. We've received prestigious awards for our work. The very practical, business-oriented person would recognize that we've gained recognition through the funding that we have from our companies. Our sister societies recognize this and pay us a lot of recognition and appreciation, from the American Association of Petroleum Geologists and the Society of Petroleum Engineers. And this Life of Field project is clearly one where our technical teams are comprised of representatives and volunteers from our sister society, so a full multidisciplinary type effect.
Was this the first time that companies had come together? And I know in reading the literature on SEAM, one of the advantages for companies was that they couldn't afford to do this modeling, synthetic modeling, on their own, so they could come together as a bunch of organizations and all pitch in to create something beneficial to everyone.
Yes.
Was this really the first time they had thought that out of the box and come together?
I would say the answer for that actually would be a spectrum. But for the number of companies we had, for example, in the first one on the order of 36 companies, clearly that was the first time to see that many companies. You see consortiums that'll have 2 or 3 companies, so the concept's been around for some time. But it's the scale of what we do, which is relatively unique, both in terms of the modeling, from the business side, the number of entities involved. And we have enough history over a decade's time to be able to see how well that works with a changing commodity price and things like that. When the price of the commodity is very high, there's more people that would like to partake in this. When the price of the commodity is real low, it's a much more exclusive type participation.
So is in September the second column of land systems going to be rolling out open? Like, is that sort of a celebration of it now being open?
Yes, there'll be certain components of it will.
Okay.
And so this is kind of the jigsaw puzzle a little bit. Well, don't I get to see all the pieces? Well, some of the pieces are going to be left out of the jigsaw puzzle until their time expires. Okay. But the fun sometimes for this is trying to work the jigsaw puzzle without all the pieces. That's part of the draw. And so there'll be certain portions of it for which that time is involved. There's certain fundamentals. And so, but there's definitely, we know from a knowledge content point of view, there's more available through this than we've had out there in the prior time. The ultimate measurement of that is an academic one. You have to do the research and go through and identify all the publications and things like that. But what'll be even more fun is to see who picks up on some of these things if they'll publish. Now, what we do know, through anecdotal testimonials, is that certain organizations will take a concept or something like that, and then they'll do it internally. Now, we have an example of that in terms of in the unconventional area, where they had some information available. And so one of the participants, a very global internet integrated oil company, took one of the models and then modified it to study another application, which is a hot buzz topic, and then presented that.
Could you explain briefly the kind of data already made available to the public through SEAM?
The key thing there in terms of the data are wells. What I mean by a well is that we drill into the earth in order to make measurements of the rock properties and the fluid properties, but we also provide like a straw or an opening into the reservoir from which the fluids and oil, if you will, is going to come back to the surface. And so we will we can take actual well data if we're modeling that particular situation, or we can do a synthetic well. So that'd be one key part. And then for those that really like geophysics and seismic, it's about seeing the seismic data. And so the seismic data would be the other component. And that's what makes these things so powerful, is that what we're doing at a fraction of the cost is generating the synthetic data, but we're doing it with the same physical constraints and assumptions of the models that we're actually measuring on the Earth. And that's so you can eliminate, or you can provide a variety of interpretations, and you can choose which ones that you want to focus towards, which we can demonstrate with the more history and calibration and control we have, is that you're really kind of eliminating the ones that are going to have the less favorable outcome. That's very powerful. Now, I should mention, one of your questions probed, actually this is very important, is that much of what I've been speaking about is accessible on our SEG website. And so the fastest path to see information that is very accessible would be www.seg.org/SEAM. Right.
So in addition to subscribing, you can just, a company or an individual could purchase the SEAM data set on their own without subscribing.
Yeah, that's correct. And so in the business model, we want to make it accessible. So we're just basically trying to recover cost. And for businesses that are well-established businesses, these are very reasonable costs.
Is there still time for companies to get involved in that last life of field problems and influence the
life
direction
of field,
of that?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. Life of field is basically at its earliest stage right now. So that's wide open. And so what we know, so in business times like this, our administrators, they want the certainty that this is going to happen. But what we know clearly from our history is that it's kind of like a bus. Is the bus isn't going to leave until it gets just the minimum number of passengers. But once that bus leaves, you've seen this phenomenon. All of a sudden, everybody goes running for the bus because now that they know that the bus is going to leave, they want to be part of that. And we're just starting to see some evidence of that. Part of that ties in with our marketing strategy, is that we're doing one last push here before the end of the year, such that if companies sign up for it, they get a little bit of bonus from another project data, and they get a slight price discount.
Will SEAM have workshops or some kind of presence at the annual meeting in Dallas?
Yes. If you recall, I'll call it the most successful annual meeting structure, is that on the last 2 days of the annual meeting, there will be research workshops. Our research workshops are far more expansive than just the SEAM program, but SEAM will be involved in 3 of those workshops this year on pore pressure. Most people don't realize that just a question in a setting can be very instructive in terms of the penetration of an idea in its stage of development or even its global reach in that regard. And that's again one of the strengths of our annual meeting program, is we're that very unique environment of working with ideas on a global basis. And so that's why you see some very interesting people attend an SEG annual meeting. People you wouldn't normally expect, but sometimes they'll be some of the top investors in the world. So in effect there, with the SEAM modeling then, today what I've submitted to you is that you need to have some concept of the geology and then some concept of the question that you're asking. In the case of the marine case, we wanted to be able to take, since it's a surface measurement, a geophysical surface measurement, it can be affected by the medium of the water and the geometry of the sediments against the salt face. And so what's been absolutely remarkable, through the decades, is how focused on that problem the industry's come up with, and academia has come up with tools that allow us to get a better image and see the geology. And now we see the fluids. One of the things where all this is heading, this is an extremely important, this is all heading to what we're calling right now Geoscience Simulators. And the simulators, in that one term, we really make a linkage, particularly with the younger generations, because they automatically think of gaming. And that's where the technology is converging. And so we're prepared, based on the work that we've done over the past decade, we can make a transition to embrace more simulators, make it even more fun for learning. It's never been a better time. What's really interesting on this is that when you get involved in the execution, how do you do these things? The classic ways is that people always want to see they want to kick the tires and stuff like that and get in the car, turn on the engine. Well, wait a minute, we haven't designed the car yet. So it's a little bit different. And then you start to get, people that don't want to commit themselves unless, you got this player and that player and what about this amount? And so it's all very fluid. Some people are very uncomfortable with that much uncertainty. It'd be like you have no home budget, but you're going to go out and do this and you're going to do that. And most people's experience with that is very less than satisfactory. But on the other hand, we're coming up with better and better ways to kind of prepare these things and be more effective in communicating in a rapidly changing environment the value of these things. And then we watch that extremely closely at SEG, because the question for us, for the Society of Exploration Geophysics, is whatever we do, is it still relevant? And that's what we're changing. That's what we're engaging very directly in this rapidly changing world.
Currently, SEAM is seeking partners for its latest project, Life Afield. Participation in SEAM is open to any organization that would benefit from the technology and the synthetic data sets that evolve from the program. Additional information about becoming a SEAM partner is available at seg.org/SEAM. To learn more about the SEAM workshop on September 15th and 16th in Houston, Texas, in partnership with the Geophysical Society of Houston, see the show notes at seg.org/podcast. You will also find links to the SEAM data available to the public. Subscribe to Seismic Soundoff on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy the show, show your support and please review the podcast on iTunes. It helps others find the show. Season 1 of Seismic Soundoff is sponsored by the SEG Wiki, home to hundreds of biographies of key geoscientists, geophysical tutorials, and core content from the science of applied geophysics. Visit wiki.seg.org to learn how you can grow the world's first online geophysics encyclopedia. This episode was produced by Isaac Farley and me, Andrew Gary. Original music by Zach Bridges. Email us at podcast@seg.org or call us at country code 1-918-497-4627 with your comments and questions. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Soundoff signaling off.
Hey, you made it all the way through the show. Congratulations. My name is Isaac Farley, SEG Digital Publications Manager. The Society of Exploration Geophysicists, founded in 1930, is a not-for-profit organization committed to providing high-quality educational, networking, and professional development resources to 24,000 members in 126 countries. Wow. To learn how you can become a member, visit seg.org. Thank you.